Okay, and we're now live.
Thank you, Leah. Right, good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Grant Nurden, and I will be chairing this meeting. It will be live streamed, so I just want to remind everybody that we need to follow the Council's guidelines, etiquette on Zoom meetings. I would also like to welcome Mark Hodges from Ernst & Young, who is joining us for the second time. He came when he presented the audit report at our last meeting in November. Right, so we need to, in starting the meeting, we need to just take a roll call, and then if anybody has got any declarations under procedure rule number 8.
Okay, so Councillor Bullman.
Here, no declarations.
Councillor Crotch.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Holland.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Nurden.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Vincent.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. And I notice we have Councillor Murrell in the room as well. Do you have any declarations?
Present, no declarations.
Brilliant. That's everyone, Chair.
Thank you. And of course, now we don't have any apologies because there's nobody who isn't here, which is good. Right, then we go on to the minutes of the previous meeting, meeting in 26th of November. Shall we just take that as a whole, or do I need to go through page by page? So that we can approve those. Has anybody got any comments on the accuracy of those minutes?
I wasn't present, Chair, I'm afraid, so I'll abstain on that.
Okay, super.
Chair, I wasn't either.
Okay.
Chair, and the same goes for me, I'm afraid.
Right, so it has to be
By way of isolation, then I was here and I do approve them.
absolutely perfect. Right, so thank you for that. So I can go and sign those. We'll do that, I presume, electronically, or will I have to come into the office to sign the papers?
We're still sorting that out at the moment, but we'll get back to you on that one.
Okay, excellent. Fine, thanks. Okay, then we go on to matters arising, agenda item 4. And are there any matters arising that members wish to raise? No, I don't see anything there, so I'm just going to comment on page 5 with regards to minute number 54, and that I have completed the cyber training, but I only managed to get 95%. So, Rodney, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a further update on the risk management training, which I think is on page. No, that's another item I was going to raise. If you wouldn't mind, Rodney. You're nearly there. There we go.
Oh, sorry about that. The request was for a cybercrime training, which is available on SkillsGate, and the risk management training is still being developed.
Okay. At what level is that going to be pitched? Is it going to be specifically for because you get the strategic, then you get the service delivery, and the that sort of those? Is it going to be at the strategic level, or is it going to be at the delivery, the normal service delivery level?
I must admit, I'm not directly involved in that. Is Faye able to come in and help on that?
Let me help, Chair. So the risk, as you're aware, I've been off on maternity leave, but it's very much go on the training programme for risk management. We want to offer it to audit committee members, first of all, just to guide you in terms of how you're reviewing the framework and the registers that are provided to you. We need to set up a programme for officers as well when they're considering the risks that they're facing. And then any further suggestions for training, whether that be extended to more members, and we're happy to receive those. But yes, that's very much needs to be developed in the coming months, and arrange a date with you so that you're all able to attend.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you, Faye. And it was very remiss of me not to have welcomed you back, because it's very good to see you again at our meeting. So welcome back.
I'm glad. Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Right, going on to the 6.5, which is, 65, on page 7, we resolved to note and approve the strategic risk register for the council. And I've been advised by the leader that the strategic risk register still needs further work before it can be signed off by the cabinet. I'm expecting greater involvement by the respective portfolio holders, as they are involved in the strategic direction that the council is going, and consequently they are more aware of the risks that would impact in their portfolios. So that's something that we will see again. That is on our work program for a future meeting, but yeah, it's going to be something that we will have a lot more discussion about. Right, so then we go on to, are there any other matters arising? Sorry. No. We go on to agenda item 5, which is the annual report of the Audit Committee, and this is now over to Faye.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chairman has indicated, this is the annual report of the Audit Committee, which is reported to Council. Last year was reported in July. We've pulled this report together based on the minutes of the meeting of the previous year, and it provides a bit of context about some of the stuff that you've been working on, which includes the risk management policy, any changes that you've asked for in the annual governance statement, your work on the statement of accounts as well. And also internal audit. So we had a revision to the original plan brought back to you in July for your comments. So there's clearly been quite a lot of work here, and we've tried to pull that through in the report. I just, at this point in time, this is pulled together on your behalf. So if you had any comments or any additions that you wish to add in there before it's presented to Council, I'd be very happy to receive them, and I'll make the tweaks before passing it back to you to present.
Oh, thank you, Faye. Has anybody got any comment? Because I think it's a very well structured and a very good report. Yep, so I just see a lot of nods there. Even Karen, good. Right, so the recommendation is to recommend that Council approves the content of the annual report of the Audit Committee. Can I have a second on that? Thank you, Susan. All those in favour? There we go. So that looks unanimous. Right. So then we go on to agenda item number 6, which is the Audit Committee self-assessment. And this is again over to Faye.
Thank you, Chair. The self-assessment was carried out last year in January 2020. So I've brought the results back to you in this report. And I just think it's worth going over what we scored last time and then making any amendments as suggested so that it can be updated ready for next year. Of course, if there are any additional action points which you feel that we should raise in here and add to the work programme, then we can do that also. So if I just take you to those that we answered partly last time, we have a 3.2, question 4, the committee considers that more could be done to highlight the role and purpose of the audit committee across the authority. I'm pleased to be able to report back that the annual report was presented to the council in July 20, and there was a bit more detail in that exec summary about the purpose and role of the committee. So I think we can quite safely move that to yes if you are all in agreement about that. Question 15, the membership of the committee has not been provided with the CIPFA Audit Committee core knowledge and skills framework. That has now been circulated, and I haven't had any feedback from you in relation to any missing skills or knowledge. So I think, again, we can move that to yes. That does obviously exclude the training element of it in relation to risk management, which will be arranged in due course. Question 18. The committee feels that more could be done to seek feedback on its work from those interacting with the committee or relying on its work. I had a look over the minutes and I couldn't see specific reference to that, but I think it's probably more of a discussion for you as to whether you feel that can now be moved to a yes. So I'll just pass that back to the committee before we go on.
Yes, because I make the effort when presenting the minutes of the audit committee to council, and not just the annual report, but also the normal council meetings, about what the work is that we've been doing or looking at. So I'm quite happy to move that on to a yes. Also, at the when the annual report was presented at the last full council meeting, we were also complimented by the portfolio holder for finance about the work that we as a committee have been doing. So what are the other members' comments on that? Yeah, Adrian?
Yeah, I think I'd go along with that, Chair. I remember you saying in full council meetings you sort of court opinion. So you ask for the opinion of members. So I think it has moved on. Yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Anybody else?
I would agree with that.
Karen? Yeah, Karen?
I was going to say I support exactly what's been said.
Okay, so we can move that one on to a yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Right, Faye.
And then the last part of the questionnaire provides a bit more narrative on the individual responsibilities of audit committees. And the only one where we're scoring slightly lower than a 4 and a 5 is the risk management part. Now, at the time, you weren't receiving the register and the policy hadn't been approved. So I think it's certainly come on a lot more from the last time we looked at this. So my question to you as a committee is, would you like to move it up to a 4? Or wait until the training has been received and delivered before we can say that we are
Peter?
more in line with best practice in that area?
Sorry,
I would prefer to wait until we have that coming forward.
Absolutely. We have David King, Councillor King, has just arrived in the meeting. So if you could just give a declaration.
No declarations. Unfortunately, my father had a bit of an accident this morning. We think he's broken some ribs. So it's caused me a little bit of a delay this morning to get in, but I'm here now.
Okay, well, welcome anyway. Good to have you here. Right. So, yes, we're happy with that. And what is our recommendation that we need to?
So if you're happy, Chair, I would just like to make the updates as suggested, and then we'll have another, it's a very informal paper, so we'll bring it back to you next year for another discussion.
Absolutely fine, brilliant. So the recommendation is that members note the attached checklist at Appendix 1 to this report to ensure that it is an accurate reflection and update as appropriate. So we will be updated. And thank you, Peter. Did you want to say something, or was that just to say yes, you agree? Brilliant. Okay, so that moves us on to the next agenda item, which is the progress on internal audit activity. So again, it's over to Faye.
Hello again, thank you, Chair. Almost last one. Okay, so you've seen this report quite a few times before. You're all familiar with its layout. So I'm going to jump straight to 3.2 of the report on page 29, which outlines the number of days that we've been able to deliver within this period. And it highlights that 72 days of programmed work has now been completed, which equates to 56% of the revised internal audit plan for 2021. At 4.4 of the report on the following page, you'll see those that we've been able to finalise within this period. And we've just got one here, which is for accounts payable. It's received a reasonable assurance, and we have 2 important recommendations raised as a result, and 1 needs attention. I just want to draw your attention before we move on to the appendices to 5.3. So this talks about the latest performance position in relation to the contractor. It is still at green. However, as you'll see from Appendix 1 and from the number of reports that have been brought back to you, that we have experienced some significant difficulties in getting Q3 work completed. Since this report has been published, we have been able to find or issue in draft the corporate governance and the HR and payroll report. So it is moving in the right direction. But I think it's fair just for members to note that we are up against it in terms of completing the plan. I think we're getting on track, but we still have some way to go. So I will continue to monitor the progress very closely with the contractor, and we will be having regular discussions about resolving these delays going forward. As you can imagine, obviously this year it's been a little difficult on both sides to get the audits up and running first of all, but then to not impact on officers' time too much. So just highlighting that there for you. If I move on to the assurance review of accounts payable there, we've got 2 important recommendations raised, and the first is in relation to new and changes to supplier records. So we've noted that changes to supplier bank details need to be verified with the supplier. First of all, we're not saying that they weren't verified with the supplier, just that there wasn't a note in place to inform us of this. And having looked back over the testing, this particular control weakness relates to South Norfolk only, not to Broadland. We didn't find any evidence there. However, the recommendation we feel, and the action point coming out of that still stands, that we very much need to be reminding staff to ensure that that control is as strong as it can be. With the amount of fraud attempts going on out there at the moment, it's particularly important that this one is strong. So that's why it's been highlighted here to you. The second one is payments of invoices. So we need to see that in line with the public contract regulations, not only the number of invoices that have been paid to suppliers, but that they have been paid within 30 days, and details of any interest that's been paid as a result of any late payments. So we've raised that point there for management to take on board. So that's the accounts receivable one, and then you've got, accounts payable one, and then you have assurance mapping. This exercise was carried out by the auditors following our desktop risk assessment of the plan for 2021 and the revisions made to the plan. And this gives us as a team and management and yourselves comfort that we haven't missed any key risks, that the plan we've got in place for this year is covering that. And what we did was issue questionnaires to management to allow them to come back to us about any changes in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And anything that we are unable to focus on this year that has come out of this review, we will consider for the following year. So the table gives you a lot of context about the work, the great work that's been done to really respond to the coronavirus pandemic. And then on the second side of the column, you'll be able to see how we're providing coverage in those areas. So I'm happy to take questions now that you may have on the contents of that progress report.
Right, I have a few questions, but is there anything that any of the other members would like to raise? Peter?
Exactly what were the delays on the part of the contractor, and what has been done to address them?
So we've got the reports in Appendix 1 that say going through quality assurance processes. That's a delay from our part in getting the final management comments. So when we're issuing the drafts, we're seeing a bit of a time lag for management to respond in some cases. And then there's delays on the other side of the fence for getting resources in place and completing audits on time. And that may be down to receiving information late. We have had some sickness in the team as well. So there's been challenges all around for that. I think, you know, having me back from maternity leave is going to help, because I'll be able to speak to the contractors very, very regularly about where we are and really assist them in pushing these forward. So that has made a difference, and we have seen a few more reports come through as a result. So that's why I'm kind of highlighting it, but I'm fairly confident that going forward we can get this back in hand and really push it forward to completion for year end.
So you'll be gently nagging then?
Gently nagging, yes.
Or maybe not so gently, I don't know.
No, absolutely. We do work together, and it isn't so much about nagging. Sometimes it can be about just breaking down any barriers and making sure that they're getting what they need. So I'm just advocating the importance of the work that needs to be carried out as well. So it is very much a team effort, and they are working hard. I'm completely satisfied that they're doing everything they can.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else got any other questions? Adrian?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, delay on muting there. Yeah, I was partly to echo what Peter was saying there. Was there anything particular driving those delays? But I think you've given assurances there's no resistance to it. It is just around the COVID delays and such like. The only other comment I had was at the top of page 35, where you talk around the new and changes to supplier, and you referenced it verbally there. It talks around to reduce the risk of inaccurate changes and payments being made. I would have expected perhaps to see fraud mentioned there as well, because obviously change of bank details is a high risk fraud area on invoices. And I thought it may have made reference to that in there, but you
Yes,
verbally
thank
mentioned
you.
it.
That's in relation to the recommendation that needs to be made, but in the report you'll see that the risk is very clearly highlighted in relation to fraud there. We have picked that up, but thank you.
Good. Thanks, Chair.
Right. Thanks, Adrian. Right. I had a question also about that particular changes to supplier bank details be verified with the supplier. Having just done this cybercrime training course, you cannot rely on email to verify the supplier. So how would it be done safely for both the council and the supplier to have that verification? What sort of process do you have in mind for being able to do that?
So a good old-fashioned telephone works well. We'll have a number on record for the contractor or for the person that's sent in the purchase order. So we need to be using that and utilising that, because we believe that to be accurate in the first place. You can also go onto the website and verify telephone numbers that way, and email addresses that way. But yeah, the risk is just increasing all the time because of cyber fraud. But generally, if you're making sure that you go from your records and you're making an effort to speak to somebody at the company with a telephone number that you've got, you can be safe that the changes that they're requesting are genuine. But regular training needs to be kept up to date in this area also, so that we can be responsive to any changes in the fraudsters' attempts, because clearly they're getting quite advanced at getting these through, and people have been caught out. So we need to remain vigilant in this area.
Thanks, Faye. The next one is payment of invoices, and it says data on payments to suppliers be published on both councils' websites. I went on to Broadland's website and I could see all the payments that had been made, but they were only made up till the end of December. And I didn't know about what the regulations 2015 are with regards to 30 days and whether there's interest on that sort of thing. But it was up until the end of December. So the question is that what is on the website sufficient? And the second part of the question is, why is it till the end of December only? Are we going to do we do it annually, or do we do it monthly, or when can we expect to see details of the payments for January and February this year? So it's partly a question for Rodney as well as for Faye.
I believe annually is sufficient before I hand over to Rodney to comment.
Thank you very much. I must admit, I don't know how often we do publish on the website. I believe it is quarterly, but I will need to check that. But as Faye says, the requirement is only to publish annually. But what the requirement is, there's actually two different things we have to publish. We have to publish a list of who we pay is one thing, which we do. And the other thing is just very much to provide the percentages of actually what percentage of our invoices have we paid within 30 days, which is obviously be really high for this council because we do have a policy of paying all our suppliers within that 30-day period. And indeed, we've been paying them quicker than that due to COVID. But there's also a case of we also need to publish if we've had to pay any interest to any supplier because of late payment, and the figure for ourselves will be nil, but we do need to publish that on our website to be in compliance with these regulations.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. Then also going further down on that page, previous audit recommendations. This is going to the key controls audit in March 2020. And it's one of these, and it's important recommendations, remains outstanding relating to the use of purchase orders for all purchases. Rodney, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit more detail and to indicate why it is still outstanding after a year after the audit was completed.
I must admit, I thought that one was going to be removed because actually we've completed that as far as possible in that we do a weekly report, and if anyone hasn't done their purchase order, we've been chasing them up, and actually the numbers of invoices we've been paying without purchase orders has reduced dramatically. So I must admit, I'm surprised it's still on there.
Yeah, I think this might be a time lag from when this report was finalised to signing off that recommendation. I'm just catching up on minutes from the previous couple of meetings when I wasn't in attendance, and it looks as if Trevor attended the audit committee to talk over some of the progress made in relation to those outstanding recommendations, and a number were signed off once evidence had been received of those. So if I may, can we just confirm at the next meeting that that is now complete and signed off, and get that information back to you? Because I certainly agree with Rodney's point. I think it is just a time lag between the time of the report being finalised and that information being there.
Okay, excellent, thanks. So Jessica, you made a note of that. Yeah, for the minutes, brilliant. Okay, that's as far as the assurance mapping is concerned. I did see on page 38, paragraph 10, where it says a summary of all the outcomes of the review are detailed in the table below. Questionnaires were not received from all departments. So if I can maybe have comments from Rodney, why questionnaires were not received from all departments, why this is, and whether was this acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable that the departments do not respond to internal audit when they request information or a response. So if you can provide us with some kind of explanation as to why that happened and whether it was reported through to CMLT or even up to the managing director.
Sorry, thank you. Very good sort of challenge, I think there. So I think it's fair to say that all key departments responded. However, there were some that didn't, and that's very much due to the pressure of the response to COVID and actually other work pressures. This obviously got considered by the the internal auditors, and they considered actually the response rate they got was sufficiently high for them to be able to issue this report. But I agree, in an ideal situation, we should be responding to all these audit requests. I think Tia were probably of the opinion that, given the circumstances, this response rate was acceptable in this current sort of circumstances.
Thanks, Rodney. Any comments from you, Faye?
Yeah, I would agree with that point. The questionnaire was issued at a time when the councils, both councils, were under an immense amount of pressure to handle the pandemic and keep up to date with everything and the changes that were going on at that time. Absolutely right. We did receive enough information, I feel, for us to compile our report. We purposely didn't name and shame those departments that didn't respond to us just because of the time in which we issued it to them. In an ideal world, yes, we would like to have 100% back. And if it was a formal piece of internal audit work, we would insist on that. And if we hadn't had anything back, we would be speaking to senior management and to inform yourselves. But as this was a fact-finding questionnaire style piece of work, we're satisfied that what we got back was as good as we were going to receive at that point in time.
Okay. Thank you, Faye. Anybody else got any further comments? No. All right. So we move on to the recommendation. That members note the progress in completing the internal audit plan of work and the outcomes of the completed audits for the 2021 financial year. We're happy to note that. Yeah, cool. Thanks. That moves us on to the fraud policies review. And this is now over to Ian, I would think. Oh no, wait, it's Rodney. Rodney and Ian is there, so that's great.
So, Chair, Ian is going to lead on this one if possible, please.
I thought so. Okay, over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Rodney, and thank you, Chair. So very briefly, the fraud policy and the anti-money laundering policy are being written as new policies. They've taken into account current best practice. Essentially, I believe they provide a guide for both staff and councillors to provide a clear reporting procedure. Obviously happy to take questions in respect to those policies. I believe the whistleblowing policy is on the agenda for the at the moment as well, and Emma may have something that she may want to add to that as the author.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Morning all. Yeah, so with this as well, you have got the whistleblowing policy. We thought we'd bring all three at the same time because they are really complementary of each other. And again, this has been written as a fresh policy based on best practice and based on actually we used across the whole North Internal Audit Consortium. We've made sure that everyone has the same policy as well. So this is simply following that, as I said, in line with best practice, and it gives, whether the person's a councillor, an employee, a supplier, a contractor, a member of the public, a route through to raise concerns that they believe need to be dealt with as a whistleblowing. So that policy there sets that out. You will note as a committee there is procedure in there as well, which is unusual for policy. However, as this is something that external people look at, they need to understand the process behind that, and that's why we make sure the procedures within that policy for that going on the website as well. But as with Ian, I'm happy to take questions, Chairman.
Absolutely brilliant, thank you. And I have to admit that I was very impressed with the content of those reports. So thank you to all those involved in putting those together. Just one question that I have, on page 53, we have the anti-money laundering policy contents, and then it says effective date to be confirmed. I presume TBC is that. And I was just wondering whether that indicated that, well, it's only going to become effective now because we don't have a policy in place for anti-money laundering. But if you could just clarify why it's not just an amendment to our existing policy.
Of course. Thank you, Chair. I can confirm we do have a current money laundering policy. As I said at the introduction, these have been written as brand new reports. So the effective date, if it's approved today to take forward to full council, the date will start there and replace the current money laundering policy that we have at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else got any questions on that? Because I just have one further. Well, one semantics, but it's something that I did notice. We talk at the top of page 58, a cash payment of more than 15,000 euros. Have I read that correctly? Or is it just my computer that has changed it to 15,000 euros? No, it is 15,000 euros. Can we, because we've left the EU, can we have that amount reflected in sterling rather than in euros?
Thank you. And once again, this could be a time lag from when the report was completed to our exit from EU. Obviously, we are still using EU legislation currently until that's replaced by UK legislation. So as it stands at the moment, it is still EU, and therefore it will be in euros and not pounds. But of course, we can look at that when the policy is reviewed on an annual basis and updated as required.
Okay, so we don't. It's not a worldwide thing that we put it as that 15,000. It could be 16,000 pounds, for example. Or do we change? When do we change that so that people who are reading it in the UK will know that it's that amount that we need to consider cash payments of more than?
Absolutely, it's written to reflect current legislation which we're working under at the moment. As that's replaced, we will change that to pounds as the set amount.
Okay, excellent. So that's what I meant.
Thank you.
I didn't comment earlier about missing spelling, but the very next line says, however, it is good practice that whenever the council enter into, so it should be council enters into such activity, that you can just take that away as well.
Thank you. I'll update it.
Yeah, brilliant. Right, so we have, anybody else got any comments? Yes, Adrian.
So just one, Chair, and it's the reports I think are all good and the policies are all really good. It was just regarding the access to those reports for both members and employees. How easily available are these for members to see, and how easy could we be able to report? I think that's quite important that we have visibility of these.
Chairman, would you like me to respond on that one?
Yes, please do, Emma.
As I try my best to look after you all. Once these have been approved by council, all of these will go on the website as appropriate, and we will also make sure they're in your member area. I know earlier in the meeting you had a discussion about training, and in particular I think you were talking about the risk management training. What I'd also like to do on the back of these three policies is to put some training in place on all three policies, and again put that through Skillsgate so that all members within their area on training can have that regular training on all of these policies, so they're there in the forefront and you understand how they work, and then therein lies you then get the access as well, obviously through the member area and bits and pieces, but it will help to raise these in your mind as well. So that's the plan with these policies.
Thank you, Emma. Right. Anybody else got any questions on it or comments? No? Okay, so
Chairman Councillor Vincent has. I think her hand's disappearing in the virtual background.
Sorry, I didn't see it.
No, I have a virtually disappearing hand, as you said. So thank you. It's a very good report. So thank you very much for bringing that forward. My question is just for to check whether, again, it's because it's a policy. Should that go straight to council, or I think I've raised this once before about policies being agreed by cabinet rather than council, and I just wanted to double check we're following the right process. That was all.
Yeah, Chairman, do you want me to come
Yes,
back
please.
on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have had this before. This is where we fall into that kind of interesting greyish hole, I think, with audit committee, because ordinarily your reporting line is into council, so you do make your recommendations to council, as we've said in that report. I think what we did from memory with the risk management one is we actually kind of diverted it off to cabinet and then took it to council through that route. So I think we will do the same for this one. You as a committee recommend to council, so that is right and proper in terms of the recommendation, but we will take that as a cabinet to council through, but it will be yourselves as the audit committee.
Okay, thanks, Emma. That's very helpful, and thanks, Karen, for that question, which needs to be raised. Right, so we have the recommendation to recommend to council the following amended policies: the counter fraud, corruption and bribery policy, anti-money laundering policy, and the whistleblowing policy. Can I have a second for that? Thanks, Peter. And all those in favour, yeah? It looks like it's unanimous. So thank you very much. Right, we then go on to the next agenda item, which is the annual audit letter, and this is where we have Mark. Welcome again to the meeting, and you did present your report to us in November last year, and this is now basically over to you. I think there's a note there from Emma. If you'd just like to come in, because you wanted to leave something.
Yeah, no, I was just saying many thanks for your time this morning, but I'm gonna leave you to it. But thank you,
super.
and nice
Thanks.
to see you all.
Good to
thank
see
you.
you all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mark, over to you.
Forgive me if I may, Chair, and sorry to interrupt. Is it okay if I leave as well?
Sorry, who was that?
Sorry,
Ian.
it's
sorry,
yeah.
No. Okay, no, that's absolutely fine, and thank you again for your attendance at the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Right, sorry, Mark. It is now over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, members. So the purpose of the annual audit letter is to summarise the key messages from the audit when it has formally been certified as closed. So this is really just a timeline update from the last meeting on the 26th of November when we presented our full detail about the audit of the account. So it's a bit more of a public facing front-ended document written in slightly more easy to understand language than technical accounting terms, but does reflect that following the meeting on the 26th of November, we did sign the audit opinion and formally closed the audit on the 1st of December. Otherwise, there's no other new messages within it in terms of audit reporting, but happy to take any questions on it from you.
Super, thank you. Thank you, Mark. I have a couple of questions, but does anybody else want to raise anything or have any questions on it? I'm looking for Karen's hand. No, that's not going up. Right. Just on page 93, it talks there about the disclosures on going concern. And I know this is not really much different from the previous executive summary that we received. But at around about that time, I went onto the website and I looked for local government doing reports on the going concern principle. And I wondered whether if we had asked Rodney as AD Finance for a report on the going concern principle, whether that would have had an impact on the amount of work that the external audit would have done. Because if that report had been put together, because I did see a very detailed report presented by one of the other district councils when one does a Google search, whether that would have impacted on the amount of work that Ernst & Young would have done, and whether that would have reduced the amount of additional work that was required?
So Rodney equally did a very good management assessment of going concern, which was provided to us as part of the audit procedures. I don't see why there isn't a reason in future years for that to be shared with an audit committee, as you've found elsewhere. If it's Rodney's report, if he was willing to do that to support future approval of a set of financial accounts, but it's that assessment that management did that formed the basis of our assessment. So the very fact somewhere else reported it to audit committee wouldn't have negated the need to do the work that we did. It's just a separate reporting line.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Going on to page 110, which is the audit fees, and I presume you would be expecting some of these questions. When we see a total bill of 62,000 and the original budgeted fee was 32,000, it's almost double the planned and budgeted fees. So a couple of questions. What could have been done differently? How much of what we've been charged extra was due to issues that Ernst & Young had, and how much of that increase was due to Broadland's issues? What can we do to avoid another bill like this in the future? And how much of the 18,000 charged for changes in work was already included? In other words, the work that you had quoted for or had been given to do of the 32,000 was already included in that. So those are just some of the questions that I have, because we know that internal audit was also impacted by COVID-19, yet their work has not necessitated such a significant increase, virtually double. So please, can you justify to the committee the necessity for such a fee increase?
So a couple of points along the line in answer to that. So firstly, you can't compare external audit to internal audit in terms of roles and responsibilities. We have a statutory responsibility to issue an audit opinion on the financial statements, which has to follow international auditing standards to gain the sufficient assurance that those financial statements are materially correct. Internal audit, whilst having clearly a significant and key role as part of the internal control framework of a council, has a wholly different approach to and responsibility for controls within the council. So you can't compare the fees of the two different auditors because they're doing two different jobs with two different outcomes. In terms of the fee table on the page that you reference, I would split it out. So the 18,215 that you reflect has not yet been approved by the regulator, public sector audit appointments, but that amount is the amount that would take the scale fee that they originally set to what we believe a fair fee should be to do a work encountering all of the requirements that international standards and regulators require of auditors in the current environment. So in reality reflects increases to regulatory burden upon all audit firms, not just EY. So that 18,215 is yet to be approved by the regulator, so has not been paid by Rodney yet. The additional work set out below, the £11,000 or so in the separate columns, Rodney and I have had a detailed discussion on, and all of those elements relate to the additional procedures required for financial reporting of the impact of COVID-19 in the 2019-20 year and the audit procedures required over those. So one would hope that they are in essence more of a one-off for 1920 than a recurring item, but clearly it does have and had a financial reporting impact, going concern being one key area that you've already highlighted through a question. So I guess the overall is there's nothing the council or auditors could do when you have a global pandemic or global phenomenon and it requires financial reporting requirements under the requirements of those standards, clearly every entity reporting under them has to oblige by them, and auditors have to gain sufficient assurance against them. So it's an unfortunate consequence of a bad news story that audit work and indeed financial reporting requirements increase. And Rodney and I have had a detailed discussion around all of those elements. I don't know, Rodney, if you want to pick up there, your view.
Thank you. If I can, Chair. So I think Mark's absolutely right about the 18,215. So that's the amount that EY have requested to sort of PSAA. We've responded to PSAA with a different lower figure, and we're waiting their outcome for what they will finally determine. With regard to the additional work, again, as Mark has said, most of this is that one-off effect because of COVID. We did go through with EY very much they're providing their breakdown of exactly what additional audit days they had to spend in each area. And indeed, I think being fair to EY, they are not charging us for all the additional days they've had to incur. We have done a share, which I think is fair share between the actual overall days they've had to incur and actually what's being charged to ourselves. So I think there has been a balance between that risk and that additional work between the two parties.
Super, thank you, Rodney, and thank you, Mark, for that response. I hope you appreciate that I have to ask the question. Does any of the other members wish to comment or? Yes, thanks, Karen.
Struggling unmuting, so apologies for that. I was going to ask a similar question to yourself, Chairman. My other question is just around the additional audit time related to remote working. And I just wondered if there are any lessons learned, should heaven forbid we find ourselves in a similar situation in the future, to mitigate some of those extra costs. That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Karen. So I think the majority of that line was not kind of remote working linked. It was more getting sufficient audit assurance through the audit process. But we did become more efficient as kind of lockdown went on. So clearly the early weeks of the audit were more troublesome in terms of communication and getting audit information than the back end, when I think Rodney, Julie and I, with my manager, were very au fait with using Teams and Zoom just to be able to coordinate and link through. And we did indeed use those mediums for securing audit evidence, in some cases for testing. We are now planned on the approach that all our audits this summer will be remote, irrespective of a June 21 unlockdown day, if you like, just because that's the certainty we can plan with. So we have learnt and taken on board kind of the issues from last summer, and some of those are now more efficient than the old audit approach. But clearly there's a balance between being in an audit room with a client asking for audit evidence as opposed to doing it remotely. So somewhere between 0% on site like last year and 100% like old years will be the actual way of doing it this summer.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Karen. Anybody else got any questions for Mark? No. So thank you, Mark, for your
welcome
for your report, and also for the insight that you've given us regarding the fees. Right. So what do we need to do with regards to the? Is there any recommendation that we need to put? Because I don't see any.
So, Chair, that would just be to note the annual audit letter.
Okay, right. So we have noted it, and thank you again, Mark, and also Rodney. So it moves us on to the next and the final item is to look at our. So Mark, if you're welcome to leave if you wish.
Thank you. I do have an 11 o'clock to get on to, so yes, thank you.
Okay, super. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Right. Our last item is the audit work program. And if we look through that, it's a significantly large amount of work. And it's towards the end of July. Is it possible that some of those items could be brought forward to a meeting in between? Because March and, well, we've still got the rest of March. So that's March, April, May, June, July. So it's almost 5 months before we have our next meeting. So is it possible to have a meeting in between? And this would be something that Faye, Rodney, and Jessica maybe would be able to coordinate. Is that possible? Yeah, yes, Faye.
Chair, I just want to draw your attention to 24th of July 21. You've got strategic and annual internal audit plans 2021 verbal. So that will be a full report that time. And the idea was that the head of internal audit report and opinion, and then the plan of work for the year ahead would complement each other in that meeting. So we could draw on the assurances from last year and then look at where we were going for the year ahead. In my head, we were going to be doing that in June. So I'm more than happy to have that ready at an earlier date if members are able to accommodate an additional meeting.
That's super. Thanks, Faye. But Faye, also, maybe you could enlighten the rest of the committee on some discussions that we had regarding the audit work that's going to be done over the the remaining 2021 audit work as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. So I sent you an email just outlining the fact that we need to, again, be pragmatic about our approach to internal auditing for the year ahead. We're not quite out of the woods yet, and it is still having a day-to-day impact on officers and on the internal audit team, as you'll have seen from the progress report earlier on in the agenda. Ordinarily, we'd sit down with management in January to discuss the plan of work for the year ahead. And as we haven't concluded on the majority of the work, we felt that if we provided you with a plan in this meeting, it would be very much out of date by the time we come to start it in April. So we're going to start a little later, make sure that we conclude on all of our work and draw all of those assurances into next year's plan and bring back the rationale to you so you can clearly see which risks we need to cover for the year ahead. We do, as you've pointed out, we've got a meeting on the 24th of July, so it would be ideal to bring that back to you earlier, but I'm just conscious of members' time and whether they're able to accommodate an additional paper or an additional meeting so that we can bring some of this to you earlier. Yeah.
Any comments from other members? Would you be okay with an additional meeting? Yeah, I see some nods.
That's for that, Chair.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you for that, Faye. Faye, you have something more?
Sorry, just to come in there again, we talked earlier about the risk training. So I don't know if it would be preferable to have that ready for a session beforehand so that we've got, something quite substantial to go over rather than just looking at the plans report and the annual opinion. So we can put something together and have a session just beforehand to handle that element of it and then move on to the other items afterwards if that's seen as more preferable.
Okay, and that's something that you would coordinate with Rodney?
Yeah.
Yep. Did I see your hand go, Peter? No. Oh, okay. Right, just one last thing. Rodney, if you wouldn't mind, just giving us a little bit of an indication of when we were presented with the budget, there was cost pressures relating to £10,000 being additionally requested for an increase in or expected increase in internal audit days, and that was taken out by Cabinet and subsequently agreed by Council. Could you give us a little bit more of an explanation of the rationale? I know this is not on the agenda or anything like that. But I think the members would appreciate a little bit of an explanation as to what happened there and why it's not going to impact on the budget in any way, because there wasn't an expected increase in internal audit days.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. So very much when we drafted the initial budget for 21-22, we thought that the number of internal audit days might go back to the long-term norm of about 140, 145 days. So that's where we originally said, actually, we need that budget allowance within the budget for next year to cover those potential days. We now believe probably the audit plan will be more like 130 days, and therefore Cabinet adjusted the budget to reflect what we expect the days to be. What will actually happen is when you agree the actual audit days, then we'll need to make sure that we can resource the number of audit days that are deemed necessary to fill the requirement to have a proper internal audit that meets our strategic requirements. So I think ultimately, if it was determined by internal audit, this committee and myself as a Section 151 officer, that we needed 160 audit days to meet our requirements to have a high quality audit service, then we would need to make sure that we had that budget available to cover that. And I think some of this is a timing issue. We have to set the budget before we've actually agreed through this committee the number of audit days. So all we can do is put a best estimate into our budget of how many audit days we think we're likely to incur.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Yes, that's brilliant. Thanks, Rodney. And I know it's not on the agenda, well, it wasn't on the agenda, but I just thought that would be helpful for members to understand why and how that happened. Does anybody else have any comments on the Audit Committee work program? No? Then that basically concludes the meeting, and thank you, Martin and David, for also attending.